This is the Xbox Series X. I've spent a lot of time with this console this year, so let's take a closer look at what Microsoft's latest and greatest console is all about. Spoiler alert, this is really the Xbox One 0.5. That's not necessarily a bad thing though. There's a whole lot to unpack here before we get into the unboxing. Now around the back, we've got a, you can't play that yet, can you? Oh no. I think it's time to open up the Series X. Whoa! Yo! That is an unboxing experience. Holy! Oh, I've waited so long for this. So we have the hardware. We also have what I assume are our cables, controllers, that kind of stuff. So we have an HDMI cable. Now, unlike a lot of the time when you unbox it and you go, oh, whatever, you actually are probably gonna want to use this because this is a high-speed HDMI 2.1 cable. Now, any HDMI will work with the Series X. In fact, any TV pretty much will work with the Series X. But to get those high frame rates, 8K, all that kind of stuff, you're gonna want an HDMI 2.1 cable like the one they've very kindly included. So definitely hold on to this one. There we go, that's our Xbox box. Now, why don't we take a look at our Xbox box. Xbox box? And that, my friends, is a retail model of the Xbox Series X. Now, of course, this is a little bit more PC-like than most consoles, so it is a vertical design. Although, I will mention, you can drop it on its side, so it does have 4 little rubber feet, so you can use it like this, but up front, it's pretty straightforward. You have a USB-A port, your controller button, the power button, as well as your 4K Blu-ray drive, so this will accept discs from the original Xbox, from the 360 and the Xbox One, as well as your DVDs, Blu-rays, all that kind of stuff. But around back, we have a decent amount of ports, including our HDMI, power, Ethernet, 2 more USB-A for a total of 3, as well as the storage expansion module. Up top, you'll see the big fan itself. So that is the only fan in the entire Xbox Series X, but we have done an entire video talking about the overheating potential, or rather the lack thereof, which you guys can feel free to check out. So now, I think it's time to plug it in and take a closer look at exactly what you get with the Xbox Series X this generation. Going into this generation, one of the main differences between the Series X and the previous generations is in speed. So yes, the Xbox Series X is the most powerful console of all time, beating out, of course, all the previous Xboxes, but even slightly beating out the PlayStation 5. But when you look at the gameplay, it looks nice, it looks better, but we're not seeing the kind of massive leap that we've seen with previous generations, right? Think going from PS2 to PS3, for example. Now, part of that is because the Xbox Series X, as well as its little brother, the Series S, are powered by the Xbox Velocity architecture, which is code for an SSD. Now, they're certainly doing some stuff on the back end to actually be able to sort of fire hose that data straight from your SSD onto the graphics. There's a lot that they're doing, but generally this is sort of bringing the consoles a parity to what the PC space has had for a long time. It's one thing to talk about how fast a console is, but to really get a good sense of it, let me give you a little bit of a load time comparison. So here I have Watch Dogs Legion, a game which is optimized for not only the original Xbox One S and X, but also of course has a port for the Series S and the Series X. And the difference is massive. Whereas these new consoles can load it in about 21 seconds, the previous generation consoles are over 1 minute and 10 seconds. That is a massive difference. Same thing goes for other titles such as Gears 5. While yes, on the Series X and S you're loading in 10, 11 seconds, the previous generation of consoles, they're 52 seconds and 1 minute and 1 second respectively. Same story for Dirt 5. You're looking at 12 seconds on these new consoles compared to 40 and 42 seconds on the Xbox One. That is something that you will notice every time you load a game. Now when it comes time to play games on the Series X, generally titles will fall into a couple of categories. First of all, there's backwards compatible games. These are titles that would already work on the previous Xbox One, so things like original Xbox games, 360 games, Xbox One games. They'll run at least as well on Series X, if not better than they did before. Next, there's a series of games which support smart delivery. So generally, these are Xbox One games that are being optimized for the Series X. So take, for example, Forza Horizon 4. That is a game which gets some improvements, but most importantly will run at 4K at 60 on the Series X with that patch, which of course comes free of charge. The same thing goes for a lot of other titles. Gears is a good one, where not only does it get improved quality settings, 4K 60, but importantly it also supports 120 FPS in multiplayer. Another example of an Xbox One game which is just being modified to work on these consoles. Now outside of that, there's another category of games which is not an official category, but for me, they're more of the games that can truly take advantage of this hardware. So things that really take advantage of the ray tracing, for example. Now, Dirt 5 is one of the games, as well as Watch Dogs Legion, that are technically Series X like native games. They're not just like patched, but these are the early games from the generation. As always, I expect things to improve over time, but these games are taking advantage of things like that ray tracing to push the envelope on graphics a bit. But that being said, when you look at the console generation that we're coming into with the Xbox Series X and the PS5, there's not a killer feature yet, right? None of these games look like they're true next-gen powerhouses. They look a little bit better. Where you really notice that difference, besides stuff like the loading times, is the fluidity. The idea that we will see many more games running at 60 FPS is great. 4K 60 is a very smooth experience, and at this point, I would say the majority of people who are buying these consoles already have 4K TVs. If you don't, then can I introduce you to my friend the Xbox Series S, which we'll be doing a much more in-depth video on soon, so make sure to stay tuned. But that is a console which is a little bit more focused at 1080p and sub 4K resolutions. But the idea of you're getting these games which will look a little bit better and will ideally look even better in the future, but importantly they're running quicker, smoother, and you have the ability to run at even higher frame rates up to 120 FPS. So for a good example of how the frame rate can impact your game, running at 30 FPS means that you get a brand new frame displayed on your TV every 33.3 milliseconds. If you're running at 60 FPS, you get a new frame every 16.7 milliseconds. However, if you're running at 120 FPS, you get a new frame every 8.3 milliseconds. Now, I don't need to tell you the difference between seeing someone walk around a corner in 8 milliseconds versus 33 can make a huge difference. Not only just for you to be able to react, but also for your controller to be able to respond, right? These kind of differences can not only just look great, right? I mean, obviously the game looks super smooth. There's a reason why most phones these days have high refresh rate displays, but also you have that performance inside these new consoles. Now, I don't want to give you the wrong idea here. The Xbox Series S can run some games at 120 FPS. The PlayStation 5 will absolutely run games at 120 FPS. And in fact, we've done an entire video talking about the TVs you need to get because most TVs today will not support these high refresh rates. But the nice thing about this new generation of consoles is that it is pretty much baked in from the start. So what you're looking at here, if I'm just gonna give you the top line of the whole experience going to next gen, is not necessarily games that look a lot better, right? From the graphics, there are certainly improvements and there's more to come. But what you're really gonna see is in the speed of the load times and just how fast everything moves as far as the interface goes, and just simply how smooth the games run. You should expect a higher level of performance for the vast majority of games this time around. You know, all those 30 FPS games are gonna be 60, all those old 60 FPS games are gonna be 120, with some caveats here and there, but it's a different kind of generational leap than what we've seen in the past.
Now, when you look at the Series X controller, this looks very similar to the Xbox One, and I think the theme here is very much evolution. So if you look at something like the DualSense controller on the PS5, this is a much more thorough reimagining of what a controller can do. Now, of course, make sure to subscribe to the channel for a lot more on the PS5 as well as the DualSense. But speaking specifically about the Series X, there are a couple of major improvements. First of all, it now uses a USB-C port. It also has a new textured grip on the handles. The shape has been slightly redesigned compared to the Xbox One, so it's a little bit more friendly to smaller hands. You have a new share button as well as a much improved D-pad. But generally speaking, this is very similar to the Xbox One controller, and in fact, you actually can use this on the Xbox One and vice versa. If you already have any Xbox One controllers, they will work right out of the box with the Series X, and of course, all of this is compatible with the PC as well as things like your phone as well. Now, there are some under-the-hood improvements on the Series X controller, so things like latency has been improved, specifically when you're using with these brand new consoles, but generally speaking, if you like an Xbox One controller, you'll like the Series X. It's very much a Xbox 1.5 controller, if I do say so myself, which, considering that I liked the Xbox One controller more than pretty much anything else, not a bad thing. But it's not quite as ambitious as something like the DualSense.
If it ain't broke, don't fix it.
It's a great point, unless you can fix it better.
So if you'll humor me for a second, let's say that the Xbox Series X really is that Xbox 1.5, right? So while yes, a lot of things are very similar, there are some major improvements that have been happening this console generation that just simply won't be replicated into the future. And honestly, this is really the backbone of gaming for the next 5, 6, 7 years plus. So the thing is, while certain aspects of technology and of gaming are evolving at a super fast pace, you look at graphics, right? Which, I mean, this is almost 10 times more powerful than the Xbox One when it first came out when it comes to graphics.
But then you look at the memory, which is barely twice as much, right? Certain things scale at different sort of rates. And the last generation, quite simply, was pretty conservative, right? I mean, the graphics were okay, but those last-gen consoles weren't all that powerful when you compared them to even a mid-range PC of 2013. When you compare that to today, when you build a fairly high-end gaming PC, you're actually looking at roughly equivalent specs to the Xbox Series X and the PS5. That bodes well going into this generation because you have that baseline of performance. Because let's not forget, the vast majority of games out there are designed with the consoles in mind first and PC second, right? And while, yes, I will say that there are certainly some aspects which feel very much like a quicker Xbox One, but there's also not really a lot of time to think back on those old days of going from PS1 to PS2 or PS2 to PS3, right? There's lots of different people who buy consoles. But at the end of the day, I think one of the most important things is that things are moving forward, right? And I think it's hard to argue that the Xbox Series X doesn't move things forward in a pretty major way. It might not be as flashy as the PS5. It might not have that trick new controller the PS5 does. It might not be as cheap as the Xbox Series S. But if you are someone who is interested in the Xbox One, if you are someone who is interested in a game console to play actual games on, unlike some other devices that pretend to be game consoles, then it's hard to go wrong with the Xbox Series X. I mean that in a real way, right? It's easy to get caught up in the speeds and feeds. It's easy to get caught up in the milliseconds and the megahertz, but ultimately, the Xbox Series X is a refined, quicker, and ultimately a console that has a whole lot more potential than the Xbox One ever did.